27 school facilities consolidation remediation schedule. Representative Brown, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you guys. I bring you guys a bill from our side that was an interim bill from your school facilities select committee. And Mr. Chairman, I'm going to make this as brief as possible, but please, by any stretch, feel free to ask any questions that you guys have. But if you look at page 2, lines 18 through 23 and into page 3 is really the meat of the bill. This is where we started talking about 2 years ago. We had the discussion of bringing in a consolidated remediation schedule. And what the discussion at the time was is if we can kind of combine both our capacity and our condition index into one score, that would help us rank every single school and every single facility in the state underneath one scoring system as opposed to trying to look at them at 2 different indexes. In theory, it was a great idea. In practice, what has occurred is the commission has set some standards that just don't align. After the select committee chairman penned a letter to them saying, please don't establish those, they established those particular, I'll call them arbitrary index standards. And unfortunately, it just doesn't work. And it's kind of creating a little bit of an issue where unfortunately, what we thought we were going to see is not what we're seeing. And so this bill is basically repealing the language that we put into statute 2 years ago, which takes us back to having 2 separate indexes. So we'll still continue to have the capacity index and the condition index. It's just no longer being consolidated into one. And Mr. Chairman, that is literally the intent of the bill. There's not a lot of extra information in here, but I'd stand for any questions.
Questions? Let me just see if I understand it. It strikes me as a difficult thing to do to the one is condition score, and that's very different from is there enough capacity in the school? And I would think melding those together was going to be a hard thing to do. And apparently that's been the case. Am I understanding things right?
Mr. Chairman, that's exactly right. I think in our wisdom, as the 2 bodies melded this bill together a couple of years ago, we were thinking, you can't really overshadow capacity with condition. And so we kind of thought, it should be a 50-50 split, and then you'll just kind of mold them together. But in practice, there's a lot of discussion with the commission and what they felt was right. And I believe at the final numbers, and I may be wrong on this, but I believe the final numbers came out to somewhere around a 60-40 split. So one has more weight than the other. And that's just not what the legislature was intending, was to give more weight than the other to try to prioritize some schools that might have a heavier capacity or a higher condition index. So as the bills were put forward, it just doesn't make sense to keep it in there. We had a pretty good system moving on along the first time. We screwed it up. Now we're trying to go back and fix it.
Okay. Under office.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. As a good example of what happens when you consolidate, imagine that you've got a school where the roof is collapsed. So condition score is as bad as it can be, but it's only at 80% capacity. So you weigh those 2, the school's fine, average, all's okay. On the contrary, perfectly brand new school at 120% capacity, no problems. It doesn't show up. It doesn't rise. These are statistics. These are pieces of data that cannot and should not be added to one another. We like to add and come up with a unified list. It does not make sense. I think the commission and the department put in a great deal of effort to come up with a consolidated list. It wasn't for lack of trying. They tried to think of creative solutions. It did not work. And what you also have with capacity is capacity often is a district-wide problem of some sort, where condition is a school-specific score. So you then commingle a district problem with a school problem also, which further exacerbated the reason why it didn't work. We're better off seeing 2 different lists, and when you see a critical problem, if there's no roof, fix the roof. If you've got a 125% capacity problem, fix the capacity problem.
So what it really comes down to then is you just plain need a little human judgment.
That's exactly what it comes down to. We need a human in this one.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I think Senator Rothfuss stated it perfectly. This was certainly not from a lack of attempting to make this right from the commission standpoint. And I will also say that the department worked their tails off to do as best they could to implement this with the resources we gave them. But, in theory and then in practice are two different, standards. And unfortunately, the practice side of things just did not work out the way we anticipated as a body. So.
Okay. I will say to I guess you all are students, right? That what you're seeing is an example of how the legislature does work. We try things, and if they don't work, we're not afraid to back up and say, oh, that didn't work, we'll try something else, or go back to what it was. And that is a characteristic of this legislature, and I think one of the strengths. With that, is there anybody else here present that wants to talk about this bill? Anybody else? Seeing none. Any further discussion on the bill? House Bill 27.
Move
Any
to
further-
pass.
Motion is due pass. Good? Okay, call the roll, please.
Senator Brightman. Senator Brennan.
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss. Senator Steinmetz.
Aye.
Chairman Scott.
Aye.
5 ayes.
5 ayes. Okay, the next is House Bill 31. BOCES has a local education agency. This is a joint interim bill. As I recall it from the joint interim, that basically what goes on is that we need to make these BOCES, which stands for Board of Cooperative Education Services, need to designate them as local education agencies so they can apply for federal grants, as I recall. And that is the substance of the bill. Do you all want to say a few words about it?
Mr. Chairman, I will make this extremely brief, and I'll pass it over here to the gentleman who was here through the entire interim. But your recollection is very good on this. Ultimately, what we saw during the interim was BOCES is placing a little bit of an undue burden in some cases on the local school districts by by being able to apply for these grants. They're allocating the resources at the local school district. And so what they're asking for is, hey, let us be our own LEA and we can apply for these grants at the federal level and take this instead of taking the resources from the local school districts. There's no cost involved. There's nothing about this. It just gives them the authority and the autonomy to do as they need to do to seek this federal funding that they depend on, and doesn't put the strain on the local school districts. So Mr. Chairman, you're spot on. This was a very simple bill and honestly one of the better bills that has come out of the Education Committee in a very long time.
Oh, I don't know about that. A good bill to pass, maybe. Good little bill. Okay, yes, sir.
Chairman, members of the Education Committee, my name is Dan Mayer. I'm the Executive Director for BOCES 5, located in Wilson, Wyoming. I've spoke to the bill through the interim session, and I'll just briefly go through what I see the bill can do, and I can stand for any questions. I don't want to take much of your time with giving you information you may not need. BOCES provide a key role in educating some of our more challenging populations in Wyoming K-12 education system. When districts reach out to provide services to their students, they do so because they cannot provide these intensive supports at the local level. Currently, BOCES are not eligible for some federal and state grants because in Wyoming, we're just simply not classified as a local education agency. I've provided information in the interim on how states look at that, and it's completely different state to state, and it's really uniquely to the state's needs. But there's nothing that prohibits that from happening, is the point of that information. House Bill 31 provides boards of cooperative educational services as local education agencies for purposes of this section only, and allow them to apply for all federal and state grant monies for which we are eligible. The department may inform boards of cooperative educational of grant monies for which they may apply, or create a consortium for which boards of cooperative education services may be the fiscal manager. BOCES may apply to the Wyoming Department of Ed for federal or state grant monies following the processes designated by the department. The proposal requires the WDE to treat BOCES as local education agencies only for purposes for applying for eligible grants. So what that means is that we are not part of the state formula in that block grant. So there's a clear designation between those two. The state superintendent of public instruction may promulgate rules to establish processes and guidelines for BOCES to apply for state and federal grant monies. Current statutes do not allow for nor encourage this form of partnership, which could be beneficial to students, districts, and taxpayers of Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Being new to this committee, I thank you for being here to educate me this morning. What types of grants might be available, and are there any additional requirements that might come with them?
So the grants, I do have some information on that. An example, I'll give you an example. In 2021, and we articulated this, there was a $7.17 billion of grant monies available to U.S. schools through the emergency connectivity funds. Northeast BOCES could not access funds because we were not designated as a local education agency. We were told that many of the schools in the state of Wyoming did not apply for the funds because the funds were already available to them through the Department of Education. We tried to be able to qualify for these funds, but in the end could not, due to the required designation of an LEA. Wyoming school districts would not have suffered a loss of funding if we had not had such a designation. In 2020, under the CARES Act, GEAR and ESSER funds are very specific about who can receive these funds. This includes local education agencies and private schools. Unfortunately, we are told repeatedly that we're not an LEA or a private school, but we are formed as under education law. We also, educate students. So some of those funds could have been diverted to be able to help support our programs. And whenever there's money that is maybe not, I hear often 6B grant get offered up as an area. Would that be a qualifying area? Also the federal, pardon me, before I go there, in the feds, they have type 1 and type 2 type of grants, and there's certain funds that are just not eligible through federal definition of the LEA definition. I've often heard 6B funds get brought up. Those are special ed required funds. There might be access to that, but this bill prohibits that without district participation. So the bill is really saying, in certain situations, can we go to the district and get their support to be able to go after federal dollars? Because really it's just a statutory designation, and we want that to be able to help that, and then really pursue maybe additional resources that districts may not be able to pursue on their own because of the effort it is to get some of these funds, to our state to bring in additional resources for the services or students we provide services to.
Under office.
And in addition to that, so Mr. Mayor's BOCES is primarily for special educational services.
Yes.
There are other models for BOCES as well as BOCES, which are still BOCES under statute, which is cooperative higher education. And we operate those around the state. So they'd be applying potentially for grants to purchase equipment for CTE courses that are used at colleges, things along those lines. So depending on the purpose of your BOCES, which we have a broad list of potential purposes for, you would be looking to different federal grant funding opportunities. And they're all going to have an LEA requirement for distribution or something similar.
Yes, thank you.
And I would say to the students that are here, these boards we're talking about, they're formed by either multiple school districts or school district and community college district. Are there some other mechanisms, or are they all either of those two?
I believe there are other mechanisms that they can be created by, but those which you just identified are the primary services that have been identified in Wyoming.
And they're very different.
Yeah.
His does a lot of special education. The one I'm familiar with in Casper, it funds high school students that are going to go to the community college. So they're quite different, but the problem is the same, is it not?
Yes, it is.
Mr. Chairman, I think they have to tie to a K-12 school district, which I don't know if that makes sense, but I think statutorily they have to. I don't think you could just have a higher education without it linking to a school district by statute.
Yeah,
I haven't looked at that recently, but I think that's accurate.
that would
is
make
correct.
some sense, given what they're actually doing. Okay, and committee, any further questions? Okay, thank you. Anybody else here want to speak to this bill? Anybody else? Anybody else? Ms. Teskey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. This indeed is one of the, as you recall, in November every year, the Wyoming School Boards Association hosts a conference. And as part of that conference, we have a delegate assembly. This was actually one of the resolutions that came forward in the delegate assembly. These are our highest needs kids. And the way we fund them is really kind of a travesty where, you count on local districts to levy mills to help support the upkeep of the maintenance of the buildings and so on. So as it was mentioned, what we're talking about, the grants that they would apply for would be grants that the school districts couldn't receive anyway. So I know that the previous chair of our board in Teton County actually was in part behind trying to bring this forward. So we thank you for your attention on this.
Okay. Questions? Thank you very much. Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay. Committee, discussion, amendment, motions?
I'll move it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've always struggled with BOCES because you're creating a district within a district and you lose that layer of accountability. And it makes me a little nervous. And then when we keep adding things to these districts. They can already do mill levies. They can do a lot of different things, and they're not exactly a school district. They're a conglomeration of other school districts. So who elects those people? And I've always struggled with that. And that's why I struggle with this bill is, okay, now we're gonna make them an LEA just for the purposes of this. Well, in a couple of years, maybe that changes again. And I'm always worried about the slippery slope, Mr. Chairman. So that's why I'm gonna be against this bill.
Okay.
Thank you.
Fair enough. Anybody else? Anybody else? Comment?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Steinmetz?
my concern is the same as Senator Beitman, but I also feel like we could be hindering the program in the fact that if we start relying on federal funding, our federal government is broke, really. And at some point, as a nation, we're going to have to deal with that. And so it's concerning to me to start building a program around federal grants. It's something that I'm watching closely as we move forward as a state. And so that's why I'll be a no.
Okay. Anything else? There was a motion in the bill, right? Okay. Seeing no further discussion, call the roll, please.
Senator Beitman? Senator Brennan? Senator Rothfuss? Senator Steinmetz?
No.
Chairman Scott.
Aye.
3 ayes, 2 noes.
Okay, that one passed. And we'll be prepared for comments. Okay, the next, excuse me, the next bill is titled, it's House Bill 33, School Finance, Career and Technical Education Grants, Joint Education Committee, trying to get schools better shape to purchase supplies for career and technical education, equipment, et cetera. And as I remember from the interim, there was talk that there was allocations in the funding formula for schools for this purpose, and they were being diverted to other purposes in part. So that's a very brief explanation of the motivation behind the bill. You want to add anything to that, Senator Rafis?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd note that part of the concern with the purchasing of equipment is that it tends to be one-time lump sum, large sums that are a challenge to purchase. So maybe some new machines or retooling a shop. The total appropriation of this, I think, was only $250,000, but it's to target of buying new equipment, retooling the shops, getting more modern equipment, and having a grant program available to provide that opportunity to districts that are looking for a little extra funds to achieve that. There are federal Perkins funds that have been available and are still, I believe, available, but if I'm not mistaken, those were scaled back a little bit, and that was one of the other concerns that this is addressing, is getting to Senator Steinmetz's question or discussion from a few minutes ago. Some of the federal funds that were being used to support our career technical education have been scaled back. I don't know whether those will be restored, but this is an attempt to fill some of that gap and ensure that our career technical education programs are still robust.
Yeah, and this bill does, if you look on page 6, section 3, carries an appropriation as it comes to us of $250,000. So this will have to go through the appropriation process. And this federal Perkins program that was mentioned is an old program. As I remember, it's named after a Secretary of Labor in Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal administration, is it not? I think that's who Ms. Perkins was. And so it's been around a while. But this does happen with federal programs. They get us well hooked and then they start to decline the funding. And that's just the phenomenon that one of the phenomena that Sherry was concerned about a few minutes ago. So anybody else here want to speak to this bill? Yes, ma'am. Okay, come on up. You're welcome. Do speak up carefully and close to the microphones because the acoustics in this room are awful. And tell us exactly who you are.
So my name is Tristy Thomas. I'm a senior in Natrona County. Chairman Scott, members of the Senate Education Committee, thank you for allowing the Wyoming Skills USA officer team to speak regarding House Bill 33 today. As a career and technical student organization, we are grateful for the opportunity to testify on behalf of career and technical education in Wyoming. At approximately 3:20 p.m. yesterday, the State Skills USA team was informed and asked to speak today. By 3:25, Janie Wilcox, our state director, sent a message to all Skills USA advisors in the state asking for responses on how they could use this money to allow for more CTE opportunities for the students of Wyoming. 7 minutes later, responses were rolling in. Out of the approximately 20 responses received, we would like to share an overview of their collective voices. If you are interested in seeing all of the responses that we received, please feel free to reach out to our state director. Senator Steinmetz, of the responses from your district, Joseph Martinez of Lusk High School states, "We would use this grant for consumables like lumber, welding rod, metal, tables, and other outdated items in need of replacement and repair." Chairman Scott, coming straight from your district, from Cora Huffman of Kelly Walsh High School, "This is a valuable opportunity for Wyoming CTE teachers and students. Through business and industry partnerships and relationships, our programs are always looking for ways to fund new and innovative industry standard equipment to meet industry needs. This opportunity will allow students of Wyoming CTE programs to have state-of-the-art technology, training, and experience, and help them be competitive in the Wyoming workforce." Also from your county and my home school, Troy Corson of Pathways Innovation Center states, "I have been awarded the WDEE demonstration grant twice, once for $50,000 and recently for $125,000. These grants have allowed the opportunity to purchase equipment to better serve the students of the state of Wyoming. The grants are not only allowed the program's growth, but have provided up-to-date equipment and technology that helps prepare students for their ACE certifications. This process in combination has proven very fruitful. Currently, students are attending my program and working within the industry in the field of study. This process has grown and provided the following steps for preparing students for college, careers, and military readiness. The grant has also provided opportunities for growth and partnerships within the industry by offering a high level of real-world projects for students to build their skills. These opportunities better support the need and skill set of technicians in the state of Wyoming. Senator Brennan, with your nursing background, you will be interested to hear from our health occupations advisor at East High School, Kelsey Baumgart. Our goal is to grow the health occupation program to include a more in-depth, hands-on learning environment for our students. The money would be used to purchase a simulation lab to provide more opportunities to our students by putting them in realistic scenarios. Senator Rothfuss from your district, Callie Poncello of Laramie High School says, "Our program would use funds to supply students with resources, tools, and equipment that are used within the industry to grow students' practical applications and knowledge of career readiness skills." Thank you for all of your time today, and we hope you carefully consider our message. We also hope to see you at the CTE luncheon later today, where we would love to address anything further. Thank you.
Chairperson, Senators, my name is Callista Duggar, and I'm currently serving as the Wyoming FFA State Reporter. I'm here to express my support for House Bill number 33. I'm originally from Torrington, Wyoming, and I'm a sophomore at the University of Wyoming, studying elementary education. While my degree path is in agriculture, my CTE programs still influenced my career choice. As a non-traditional agriculture student, I was highly impacted by what I learned in my CTE programs. Not only did I gain more knowledge about the industry, but I also learned how to be an effective communicator, a team player, and a problem solver. Though I'm not pursuing a career in agriculture, I can use the skills I have learned in my CTE programs to benefit me, my future students, and colleagues. As an elementary educator, I will ensure to incorporate CTE influence into my lesson plans. I knew that my place wasn't necessarily teaching agriculture, but I know that I can play a role in educating the youth through being an elementary teacher. I can educate the youth about CTE and agriculture itself. Also, my high school, Torrington, can use this grant, these funds, to support our classroom and different materials we need. For example, we have a horticulture program, but our greenhouse isn't in the best of shape, and we could use a better greenhouse to support our horticulture program. Thank you.
Chairperson and Senators, my name is Kaya Peringer, and I am originally from Buffalo, Wyoming, but I'm currently attending Eastern Wyoming College to pursue a degree in veterinary medicine. I have grown up my entire life in the ag industry, and I have an ever-growing passion for it. I found ways to grow and emphasize my leadership skills through CTE programs and have had experience that helped shape my future. One of the best experiences that have changed my life is the development of my own personal business. I am a young entrepreneur who can 100% say that CTE programs helped grow my business to form all over the country. As a producer of goat milk products and a businesswoman, CTEs have provided me with financial skills, presentation skills, communication skills, and even marketing skills, along with many other traits that have helped gain knowledge for my future careers and build me as a better person. I would not be where I am right now with my business if it weren't for CTEs. We stand in favor of this bill because we believe that getting hands-on materials for kids and supporting their dreams and goals in life will really help advance their future careers. Thank you.
What kind of products are you selling?
So I make like hand lotion out of goat's milk. And we make I have over 50 different scents of goat's milk lotion that I sell across the country.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you have your own goats, or do you purchase the goat's milk, or how do you do that?
Yeah, so we actually have a herd of 15 goats, and so we milk them, and my sister kind of helps me with that part of the process, but we do milk them and use them all.
That's great. Right.
And let me ask you, you're an elementary ed?
Yes.
Yeah. Let me say to you that, this is the Education Committee, and we are focusing particularly on the teaching of reading in the early grades. So if you're getting into that, that looks to be just absolutely key to the future of this country and the future of it, the education system. So keep at it, and we wish you the best in that career because it is very important.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Anybody else? Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Cindy Delancey, and I'm the president of the Wyoming Business Alliance. The members of the Wyoming Business Alliance also stand in support of this legislation as this is a super hard act to follow, so I'll keep my comments short, but I just really wanted to express that, the business community is firmly invested in any opportunity where we can provide opportunity for such talented individuals like that are behind me to continue to participate in growing our skilled trades and being able to power Wyoming, because in a state like Wyoming, there's opportunity for everyone, and it's our tradesmen and women and entrepreneurs and innovators that are really going to be able to power us for the future. So we ask for your support. Thank you.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jessie Defoe, and I represent the Wyoming Association of Career and Technical Education. I agree. After hearing students speak, you don't need to hear a lot from us, but on behalf of all CTE teachers, I just want to encourage you to look at this legislation and to consider it. They need this funding that would basically restore funding levels from 2021. I'm happy to answer any questions about how this grant compares to other grants written in there. I think that the department will also be here to talk about this, but there is one section on page 2, lines 15 through 18. When this bill came out of committee, it did not have a matching requirement like this bill does now after an amendment that happened on the floor. And we would just ask that you would consider that. That just adds some more red tape for CTE teachers to work with their districts and already really strapped funds. So we would just ask that you would maybe consider that portion of the bill. Otherwise, this is a bill that was worked in the interim, that's been very thoughtful to put together for our career and technical education organizations to have funding. And we just ask that you would think about that. But otherwise, I stand for any questions.
Senator Office.
Thanks. Mr. Chairman, I do have a question about, and when we had this in the interim, we talked about the need for this amount to restore funding, and I mentioned earlier that it was my understanding that the Perkins grants had been cut, and I looked it up to find out by how much, and they seem to have stabilized and increased as they had in previous years. So now I'm curious what we're restoring relative to, because it doesn't seem like we ended up losing money relative to previous years on Perkins. Not that I still support this, I think it's great, but
Sure.
I'm now curious about that, and maybe I'm misunderstanding something.
Sure, and Mr. Chairman, Senator, great question. So these are funds basically outside of Perkins
Right.
dollars that would happen with that. So while Perkins may be the same funding-wise too, I think something that will be interesting to look at is the number of districts who are applying for that funding and how the number of districts has changed and the size of districts that are receiving that funding and some of the regulations that go on with Perkins. So very interested to have that conversation, hopefully maybe even in the interim. But these fundings are in relation to fundings outside of Perkins. So that's why you wouldn't see a change in that, but just through the State Department is my understanding.
Through the State Department, Mr. Chairman, this will come through the State Department, but I guess my question gets back to, have we seen any decline in Perkins funding, or has it been stable, which is kind of what I was saying, was that the Perkins was relatively stable. This would be outside of that in addition to it, but have we seen a decline in Perkins funding?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, I don't want to speak to Perkins for sure, and that's information I could get back to you later. I just
Yeah,
know that
that'd be
these are
great.
funds outside of the
Yeah.
federal dollars.
And Mr. Chairman, along those lines, are there strings attached to Perkins? Is there anything that Perkins doesn't do that these funds would be able to do? I know that the intent here is to purchase new equipment, things along those lines. Is there an allocation of the Perkins funding that can go towards that, or what would the relationship between these funds and the Perkins fundings?
And Mr. Chairman, Senator, I could not have asked for a better question. That is the intent of this grant. The Perkins dollars comes from a Perkins 5 plan that districts have to apply for and reach certain requirements that are actually pretty burdensome. Some districts will tell you, and that's in fact why when I've talked to some CTE folks, they've even we don't even apply for Perkins anymore because of the challenges that comes with that funding. There are some districts who have the support and staff needed to apply for it, and others don't. So the intent of this grant is to help those with less red tape to say, hey, we need something quickly to do projects within our schools that doesn't necessarily have that. Now, it is at a smaller scale. Perkins would provide them more funding through different avenues, but this helps smaller districts who need help right away to go ahead and implement a lot of these CTE projects.
Sorry to get on this rabbit hole so far, but it looked like there was about $5.4 million available for Perkins. And if we have a circumstance where the red tape is onerous so that large districts are capable of getting the Perkins funds, but small districts don't have the resources to do it, then we've kind of created our own equity problem there as a result of those resources. Is that the case? And if so, should we be handling this differently? And it kind of gets back to what we were doing a few minutes ago, Mr. Chairman, with BOCES, where if you have a BOCES and you actually have an organization that's capable of receiving it and then meeting it out, that might be useful. The State Department, for example, is always an LEA, and could the State Department work on behalf of a multitude of districts, perhaps to take in grant applications and then put together a single application for the Perkins funding and then distribute that out to the school districts to reduce sort of that bureaucratic burden on individual districts?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, Senator, that is a great question. I don't want to speak to the department's capacity to do anything like that or ask, necessarily for them to do something more. But we would love to encourage the conversation of what makes the most sense efficiency-wise to make sure as many of these programs are fully funded as possible.
Absolutely. Well, let's just start that conversation and see how it goes. I don't know whether that's something that we can do or not, but really, if we have districts that are incapable of applying for Perkins grants because they don't have the resources to overcome the bureaucracy, we probably should find a way to address that.
Let me ask you then, the next step in this process was this bill will go before the Appropriations Committee as per the Senate rules, and they'll be concerned about the $250,000 appropriation. It is 250,000, isn't it? Yeah. What do I tell them if they ask me, as I think they will? Isn't that funded in the block grant funding that funds schools generally? Why do we need a separate grant program? What do I tell them?
Well, Chairman Scott, that's why we have you, and I'm glad that you can visit with them about it. But I think I would tell them a few things. One, we know that the block grant, while there is a lot of great in how that works and how we distribute funds, we know that 29% may or may not make it to our CTE kids. And that's something that we can look at reporting on another day, another time. I would tell you that in the grand scheme of things, this is a small amount of money that's going to help our communities, our students right now. We know that 77% of employers who are hiring right now say that they have hired their employee because of their CTE skills. We know in 10 years, the US is projected to have a 6.5 million worker deficit in skilled trades. And we know that our CTE graduates graduate at a 96.5%, while Wyoming's compared to 81.8%, I believe. So I'm telling you, these programs work. Our system, while it works fairly well, there's some flaws. This is immediate relief for programs that make a difference. And I think the students have already shown you that today. And it's worth the investment.
Okay? Understand?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could we get that data for our floor presentation? If you could email that to us, that would be extremely helpful.
Absolutely. And I will also have them with some handouts today at the CTE lunch. So we'd love to have you guys in the extension room.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much. I see the State Department of Education has come in. Shaner, do you want to speak to this bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members, Dickie Shaner, Department of Education. The superintendent supports this bill. But did want me to reiterate the point that Ms. Defoe just made. The match that was put in recently is not something she supports, and just thinks it's unnecessary, hurdle for school districts to seek this money. And as to the Perkins discussion, the superintendent's very committed to looking at how we're implementing that Perkins 5 plan and really trying to figure out why some of those districts aren't seeking that funding and figuring out a way to make it so it's more attractive to them to seek it.
Thanks. And I'd like to follow up then maybe over the next few months, and maybe we can talk about it a little bit during the interim and figure out what's holding districts back and what we can do to make that an easier process for them. It would be a real shame if we had districts that were opting out of Perkins 5 funding because they felt that it was too onerous, when we certainly have resources available to ensure that everybody should have access to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Am I right in thinking that difficulty is largely confined to the smaller districts, or some of the larger districts having trouble with the federal red tape?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's a little more complicated than just like sort of central administrative bandwidth at the district level. I think there's some people that don't agree with some of the requirements too. So I think there's philosophical differences, maybe there's some bandwidth issues. And that's why I think the superintendent's really committed to digging in and figuring out how we can troubleshoot that Perkins 5 work.
Can you, again, I'm looking to talking to the Appropriations Committee, can you give me an example of something that isn't agreed with?
Mr. Chairman, I can't right now, but certainly we could come up with some sort of memo on the current status of the Perkins 5 plan, who's utilizing the funds, who has chosen not to, and maybe even ask them to share why.
Ms. Delancey, can you shed some light on that?
I can, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. And just wanted to say, give you an example. I serve on the Perkins Advisory Committee as a business voice. I really appreciate your comments, Senator Rothfuss, about flushing this out a little bit. I also appreciate Mr. Shaner's comments as well, that it's not quite as simple as the feds are imposing too much red tape and we don't want to do it. An example that almost cost us our Perkins funding, and I think maybe some of you were even related to that discussion, was there was a component that I recall, I can't remember which year it was, Mr. Shaner might need to refresh my recollection, but a dispute over the amount of time needed to do extracurricular enrichment for ag teachers over a 5-year period. I think the request, and again, I can go back and get you specifics on this, but I know you were looking for an example, Mr. Chairman, and I wanted to give this to you, that there was a little bit of a pushback from the agricultural educators about doing, I believe it was 20 extra hours a year, even though they were being compensated over summertime, to keep current and relevant as far as a requirement that Perkins asked for. I think they had 5 years to complete 100 hours of extracurricular training and enrichment, and some of the ag educators felt that that was too burdensome and onerous. So to Mr. Shaner's point, it's not just, I'll be the first to stand here before you as a leader in the business community to say we do not like regulation, we don't want to be over-regulated, but it's not just as simple in this conversation as the feds are asking too much of our small districts. Like there's a little bit more at work here that might be worthy of some additional examination and discussion as far as how this actually plays out. So thankfully, at the end of the day, there was compromise reached. The department and Dr. Michelle Aldrich does a great job leading, those discussions and on behalf of the department. And she's well respected and really a person that's committed to finding a path to yes. And we were able to, get our Perkins grant done and the funds received. But I just wanted to speak to this match component. I forgot, I was so overwhelmed by the wonderful testimony of our students that I forgot to put this in my testimony. So Mr. Chairman, for just one moment, I too speak against the addition of the match component. We're not asking for match in the other parts of the block grant for our education community. And this is essentially what this is, but it's really an effort to promote clarity to make sure that these dollars are used for these purposes, as opposed to, well, we support CTE by keeping the lights on and, keeping the building heated. This is really a very clear pathway to make sure that these funds make it to the students. And so this match component feels a little bit as a barrier to having that occur. So we'd ask for the committee's consideration on reviewing that, because that was not the way, as Ms. Defoe said, that it came from the interim and over the committee. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Going back to the example you gave where they were objecting to was some of the objection to the content of the extra training they were having to get?
I'll let Mr. Shaner speak to that.
Mr. Chairman, spot on. Yeah, I think it was a dispute over what would constitute, what would qualify for those 100 hours. Is it working on your family ranch, or does it have to be working in a high wage, high demand industry in your region? Those types of discussions were what were being debated.
Okay, committee, further? Thank you very much. Anybody else? Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay, public testimony is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure? Motion is, the bill is moved. What about this matching requirement? As I see it, it's one sentence on page 2, lines 15 through 18.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'll move to strike it.
Okay?
See if we want to do that.
Motion is to remove that. It would start on page 2, line 15 with a grant and finish with page 2, line 18, district funds. Is that correct?
Yep, that is correct. Good catch, Senator.
Page 1, line 4.
So
Okay.
moved.
Did you catch that, Kim? Okay. That's the proposed amendment. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carried. Anything further on the bill? Anything further on the bill? Okay. The motion was due pass, right? Due pass is amended. Call the roll, please.
Senator Beitman. Senator Brennan.
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss. Senator Steinmetz. Chairman Scott.
Aye.
5 ayes.
Okay. Good little bill. Okay. Committee, we potentially have one bill for Friday. And it's on the mental health. And I'll warn you, I'm thinking of amending it because right now it looks to me like the bill is a flat 120,000 per district. So Cheyenne gets the same amount of total money that Claremont or Ten Sleep get. And that seems to me to be rather unfair to the larger districts. And I'm thinking of a formula that would be a certain amount per district so that the smaller ones have enough to work with. And then a per student figure. And right now, there's a prohibition against, it's a 2-year appropriation. I want to stay within the total amount of the appropriation. But there's a prohibition on including that in the standard budget going forward. And if we modify that so that we can go one school year further where it's standard in the standard budget and therefore likely funded for one further school year, then we'll match with when the next recalibration would take effect and potentially have a better knowledge of what we were doing and possibly put that into the general funding formula. So I ask you to think about that between now and Friday.
Which fund is the money coming from? Is it the school foundation program?
I think it was